Hi, I'm John with the Pond Life Podcast. This is my first video, so take it easy on me. I am actually out here on the water in our pond in North Carolina. My wife and I, we bought a property about 3 years ago that had about a 3/4 acre pond on it. We've done a lot of work and enjoyed the journey and learned a lot along the way, as well as made a lot of mistakes. So what I've done is put together a podcast channel where we're going to learn together. We're going to do interviews of pond owners, lake and management companies. We'll talk to biologists, extension specialists, as well as vendors along the way. So this is my first podcast, and stick around. Today we're going to talk about bluegill spawning and the process of the bluegill spawn. Out here we've had our bass spawn already once this year, and our bluegill are on their second spawn. So they are on the beds right now as we speak. I ran a little bit of video that will play during the podcast in the background, but stick around. I'll see you on the other end. Enjoy my guest hosts for my first podcast, and we'll see you soon.
Hey, everyone, and welcome. We are really excited today.
Yeah,
They're
definitely.
actually guest hosting for our friends over at the Pond Life Podcast.
That's right. Stepping in for them today, which is great.
It is great. And we've been digging into some really fascinating material for you listeners. Specifically, we're looking at John's research.
Solid stuff.
Yeah, and our mission today really is to unpack this process that John outlines. It's absolutely fundamental if you want to understand freshwater ponds and lakes.
Couldn't agree more.
We're talking about the kind of wild world of bluegill spawning.
It is pretty wild when you get into the details John provides.
Okay, so let's dive in. Where does John start us off? Timing, location.
Right. So John's work points out it's, generally late spring through early fall, but he really emphasizes something important.
Which is?
It's less about the calendar date and much more about the water temperature. You need that water to consistently hit a specific range.
Okay, what's the magic number, according to John?
Well, it's a range, really, between about 65 and 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Once it gets in that zone and stays there, that's the trigger.
65 to 80. Got it. And they don't just spawn anywhere, do they? John mentioned something about groups.
Exactly. Yeah, his research highlights their colonial spawners.
Yeah.
That's the term he uses.
Colonial spawners. Okay, what does that actually look like?
Think of it like a crowded neighborhood popping up almost overnight. You don't just find one nest usually.
Oh.
John says you'll find dozens, sometimes even hundreds of these nests all clustered pretty close together.
Hundreds. Wow. And where are they building these neighborhoods?
John specifies shallow water,
Yeah.
usually, 1 to maybe 5 feet deep, and calm areas. They need protection from strong currents.
Makes sense. Easier to manage the nests.
Right. And the bottom type matters too. John notes they prefer hard bottom. So think sand or gravel or even like hard-packed mud, not super silty or weedy.
Okay, strategic location finding. So the conditions are right, the spot is chosen. Then what? Who does the work?
Well, according to John's research, this is where the male bluegill really steps up. He arrives, picks his little plot of real estate within that colony.
His spot in the neighborhood.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then he gets to work, building the actual nest. It's quite the effort.
How does he even do that with, like, his mouth or fins?
Primarily his tail. John's research is really clear on this. He uses his caudal fin, the tail fin, to literally fan away the substrate.
Just sweeping it away.
Yeah, sweeping and fanning. He creates this depression in the bottom, kind of saucer-shaped.
Like a little bowl?
Pretty much. John even gives us dimensions. Imagine like a dinner plate maybe, somewhere between 6 and 12 inches across.
Okay, decent size. And how deep?
Usually around 2 to 6 inches deep. So, enough to hold the egg securely.
And he does this just by fanning his tail. That's impressive.
It is, especially when you think there might be hundreds of males doing this side by side.
That's a lot of construction work.
Yep.
And John also mentioned something about the males changing their appearance during this time.
Oh yeah, big time. It's quite dramatic. They develop these really vibrant colors. Much brighter blues and oranges than usual.
Showing off a bit.
Totally.
Yeah.
And that dark flap on their gill cover, the opercular flap. John notes it gets much darker, almost black, and more pronounced. It's often called the ear flap, even though it's not really an ear.
So they're building the house and getting dressed up?
You could say that. John describes it as them putting on their finest display. All part of the process, preparing for courtship.
Right. Which brings up the next question. All this work, the fancy colors.
Yeah.
How does he attract a female? What does John's research say about the courtship?
Well, once the nest is built to his satisfaction, the male starts actively advertising. John notes he'll circle the nest, maybe dip down into it.
Showing it off.
Exactly, flashing those bright colors he developed. And apparently, John's research mentions they even make sounds. Soft, grunting sounds.
Grunting? Really? Underwater?
Yeah, seems so. It's likely another signal to females nearby. And the females, they're paying attention.
How can you tell if a female is ready or interested?
John points to some physical cues, like their vents might appear swollen. But mostly it's behavioral. They'll cruise through the colony.
Window shopping.
Kind of. Assessing the males, assessing the nests. They seem to be quite choosy, based on John's observations. They'll swim over several nests before deciding.
Okay, so she picks a nest she likes. Then the main event happens.
The spawning act itself begins, yeah. She'll enter the nest he prepared.
Okay.
The male then positions himself right alongside her. John describes them circling together within the nest, often tilting sideways so their bellies touch.
A little dance.
It really is. And this isn't quick. John says this circling and touching, this dipping, can go on for hours.
Hours? Wow. What's happening during these dips?
That's when the eggs and milt are released. But get this, it happens in really small batches. John specifies maybe only 10 to 30 eggs at a time.
Many amounts.
Yeah. She releases a few eggs, and he simultaneously releases his milt, that's the fluid containing the sperm, to fertilize them right there in the water.
Instant fertilization.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they just repeat this process. Dip, release, circle. Dip, release, circle. Over and over. John mentions there can be hundreds of these dips during a single spawning session with one female.
That requires some serious stamina from both of them.
Absolutely. And the numbers John provides are pretty staggering. A single female bluegill over the course of a spawning season can lay. Well, estimates vary, but it could be up to 80,000 eggs.
80,000 from one female?
Potentially, yeah. And she might not lay them all in one nest. John notes she might visit multiple nests, spawned with different males.
Spreading the genetic love, I guess.
Something like that. And the male who built that great nest, his hard work might pay off by attracting several different females to spawn with him in his nest over a period of days.
So his nest becomes quite the popular spot.
It can be.
Yeah.
But John also includes this really fascinating little detail about, well, he calls them sneaker males.
Sneaker males? What on earth are those? Like they wear tiny fish shoes.
Huh? No, nothing like that. These are usually smaller, less colorful males. They don't build nests. They don't court females in the usual way.
So what do they do?
According to John, they basically try to cheat the system. They might hang around the edges of the colony looking like females or just being inconspicuous. Then, when a pair is actively spawning, the sneaker male tries to quickly dart into the nest, release his own milt at the exact moment the female releases eggs, and then dart back out.
No way. Stealing fertilizations.
Essentially, yeah. Trying to pass on their genes without doing any of the hard work of nest building or defense. It's a whole different reproductive tactic, John observed.
That's kind of wild. Nature always finds a way, huh? Okay, so spawning happens, maybe some sneaking. Then what? Does the female stick around?
No, and this is a crucial point John emphasizes. Once the female has laid her eggs, whether it's with one male or several, her job in that specific nest is done. She leaves.
She just leaves them with the kids. Or the eggs, rather.
Pretty much. The male becomes the sole guardian of that nest, and his job shifts immediately from attraction and spawning to intense protection and care.
So he built the house, now he's the security guard and the nanny.
That's a great way to put it. John's data shows this guarding phase is incredibly demanding and absolutely vital. He becomes extremely aggressive.
Aggressive towards what? Predators.
Yes, definitely predators like bass or catfish or even turtles. But also, John notes, he'll aggressively chase away other bluegill that get too close. Even other males or females who might try to eat the eggs. Cannibalism can happen.
Wow, he's defending against everyone.
Just about anything that moves near the nest. But guarding isn't his only job. John highlights he's also constantly fanning the eggs.
Fanning, like he did when building the nest.
Similar motion, yeah, using his fins, especially the pectoral fins side to side. But the purpose is different now.
Okay, why fan the eggs?
Two main reasons John points out. First, it keeps them clean, removing any silt or debris that might settle on them and smother them.
Right, keeps them healthy.
And second, maybe even more critical, the fanning action circulates the water. This brings fresh, oxygenated water over the eggs, which they need to develop.
Ah, like a little aeration system.
Exactly. John's research really underscores how essential this continuous fanning and guarding by the male is for the survival of that brood. Without him, the eggs likely wouldn't make it.
Okay, so the male is working overtime. How long does this go on before the eggs hatch?
It's actually pretty quick. John says depending mostly on water temperature again, the eggs can hatch in as little as 1 day or maybe up to 6 days if it's cooler.
1 to 6 days, that's fast. What happens then? Do the tiny fish swim away?
Not right away. When they first hatch, John explains, they're called fry, and they're super vulnerable. They typically can't swim well yet and have a yolk sac attached for nutrition.
So they just stay put.
Yeah, they usually stay hidden down in the gravel or substrate of the nest for a few more days, absorbing that yolk sac.
And dad's still on guard duty?
You bet. John's observations show the male continues to guard the nest, protecting these helpless fry for another, say, 5 to 10 days after they hatch.
Still chasing everyone away, still fanning.
Yep. Until the fry absorb their yolk sacs and become strong enough to swim freely and start feeding on their own.
That's some serious parental dedication from the male.
It really is. A huge investment of time and energy.
So when the fry can finally swim on their own, is the male's job finally done?
According to John's work, yes. Once the fry disperse from the nest area and can fend for themselves, the male's parental duties for that brood are complete. He might try to spawn again or just recover.
And the little fry, where do they go? What do they eat?
They disperse into the surrounding vegetation or shallow areas, seeking cover. And John notes they start eating immediately, initially focusing on really tiny stuff.
Like what?
Microscopic organisms floating in the water, zooplankton, tiny crustaceans, rotifers, that sort of thing.
The very bottom of the food chain.
Exactly. And as they grow, which John highlights can be surprisingly fast, they move on to slightly larger food items, like small insect larvae.
How fast do they grow?
John's work points out it's quite variable, depending on food availability and water temperature. But here's something interesting he found.
Yeah.
Fry that are hatched early in the spawning season, say, in late spring, can actually grow fast enough to reach sexual maturity and spawn themselves later in that same year, like in late summer or early fall.
Wait, really? They can spawn the same year they were born?
Some of them can, yeah. Which contributes to why bluegill can have multiple spawning peaks or waves within a single long season. It's not just the adult spawning multiple times.
That's incredible. Talk about a successful reproductive strategy.
It absolutely is. And this ties into the bigger picture John presents in his research.
Okay, let's connect those dots. Why does understanding all this intricate detail about spawning the colonies, the male effort, the fanning, the sneakers, why does it matter so much?
Well, John's research makes it crystal clear. This whole complex, high-effort, multi-stage reproductive strategy, it's the engine behind the bluegill's incredible success.
Their abundance, you mean? Why there are so many of them?
Exactly. The sheer number of eggs produced, the colonial nesting, which might offer some safety in numbers, and especially that dedicated, prolonged parental care by the male, it all maximizes the chances that at least some offspring survive that incredibly vulnerable early stage.
So it's a numbers game, but with a lot of specific behaviors to boost the odds.
Precisely. And John argues pretty convincingly, I think, that you can't really understand the dynamics of a pond or lake ecosystem, the food web, the competition, the energy flow, without understanding this fundamental process for such a key species.
Because bluegills are often so numerous, their reproductive success kind of shapes everything else.
Absolutely. If we really zoom out, John's work shows how this whole system, the massive egg numbers, the intense male investment, creates these huge pulses of young fish entering the ecosystem.
Right, like a sudden boom in food supply.
Yeah, a boom for predators that eat young bluegill, like bass. But it also means intense competition among those young bluegill for their own food, the zooplankton and insects.
So it impacts things both up and down the food chain.
Definitely. That male-dominated nest care, the sheer volume of potential new recruits each year. John shows it significantly shapes resource availability, predator-prey interactions, the whole works. It's an enormous energy investment by the males with a potentially massive ecological payoff.
It really does make you think differently about seeing a bluegill, doesn't it? There's so much going on behind the scenes, especially for those males during spawning season.
Totally. It's not just a simple fish. It's part of this intense cycle of investment, risk, and reward that, as John highlights, really drives the productivity of many freshwater systems.
A really fascinating deep dive, drawing heavily on John's research there. So much complexity in what seems like a common fish.
Definitely gives you a new appreciation.
So, here's something to think about. How does this intense, male-centric parental care system, combined with just the sheer number of eggs we talked about, influence the long-term competition and even evolution of other species within that same pond. That intense pulse of life must have wide-ranging effects.
That's a great point to ponder. The ripple effects.
Exactly. Now, if you want to explore John's findings even further, maybe get into some of the finer details we couldn't cover, remember you can download additional supplemental content John provided. Check the description for this deep dive for the link.
Worth checking out if you found this interesting.
Absolutely. And please, since we're guest hosting today, show some love for the regular hosts. If you enjoyed this exploration of pond life, make sure you like and subscribe to the Pond Life podcast. Keep exploring everything that happens beneath the surface with them.
Yeah, definitely subscribe.
Thanks so much for joining us for this deep dive.
It wasn't that great information. I did a lot of research on it, put together something digestible. Hopefully it was short enough to keep your attention and informative. The thing I really enjoyed were the sneakers. The sneaker bluegill are kind of like teenagers. They're going to run in, they're going to fertilize, they're going to run out. They don't want to stick around and do the work. They don't want to build the nest. They don't want to stay on the nest and protect the young. They just want to go along and have fun and drop their jeans in the pool. So I appreciate you sticking around to this point. Hopefully you stuck around to this point. Leave me some comments on some topics that you'd like to see and some research we can dive into, or some things that we can go on. We're going to do some how-to videos and different things. So again, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you soon. Thanks.